Welcome back to Folks Unfettered, the podcast where we strip away performance, politics, and posturing to get to the truth about leadership, business, culture, and the human condition. I'm your host, Gene Folks. You know, I fell in love with music from a very young age. During my formative years, there was always music playing in the background of our lives. It filled the rooms, the car rides, the celebrations, the difficult moments, and the quiet moments in between. Music permeated my developmental years. And over time, it became far more than entertainment for me. It became a part of my identity. In many ways, music has been the soundtrack of my life through both triumph and hardship. Now, my musical appetite is incredibly diverse. I love funk. I love R&B. I love soul. I appreciate any kind of music that moves people emotionally and culturally. But if I'm being honest, nothing has impacted me more profoundly than jazz. Jazz moves me differently. There's something spiritual about it, something honest, something raw and fearless. Jazz has always felt less like performance and more like revelation. And recently, I found myself reflecting deeply on that. On May 25th of this year, 2026, one of the true titans of jazz passed away at the age of 95. Legendary tenor saxophonist Sonny Rollins, one of my personal favorites. And in fact, I'm pretty sure I have a couple of Sonny Rollins records, vinyl records, that I'll be playing shortly after this. Don't want to get any strikes on my channel. From Saxophone Colossus to Way Out West, just a plethora of really well constructed jazz albums. When I heard the news, I started thinking not only about his brilliance as a musician, but about the deeper lessons jazz musicians seem to understand instinctively. Lessons many people in leadership positions never fully grasp. So it made me think about my own leadership style, the way I navigate pressure, the way I communicate, the way I adapt, the way I build trust, the way I lead through uncertainty. And I realized jazz has played a much larger role in shaping how I lead more than I had consciously acknowledged before. So I started asking myself a question. What do jazz musicians understand about leadership that the rest of the world often misses? Because some of the greatest lessons on leadership were never taught in boardrooms. They were played in jazz clubs. Jazz musicians understood something executives, politicians, and entrepreneurs never learn. Leadership is not control. Leadership is trust under pressure. And nowhere is that more obvious than in jazz. Now, recently, over the past week, I've had the pleasure and the opportunity to witness some legendary jazz performers, from Christian McBride, Ron Blake, Jose James, and the list goes on and on. And there's what they showed me, especially Christian McBride and friends, but what they showed me was this myth of the perfect leader. In business culture, we often celebrate leaders who appear flawless. People with polished presentations, scripted talking points, and carefully managed brands. But jazz doesn't reward perfection. Jazz rewards presence. You can hear every hesitation, every risk, every mistake, and every recovery. There's nowhere to hide. And that's why jazz musicians develop a deeper understanding of leadership more than many people who spend their lives studying it academically. A jazz ensemble works because every individual simultaneously leads and follows. That's rare in modern leadership culture. Most organizations are built around hierarchy. Somebody speaks, everybody obeys. Innovation slows down. Fear replaces creativity. But jazz operates differently. In jazz, authority moves. Sometimes the drummer leads. Sometimes the bassist controls the emotional direction. Sometimes the pianist creates the tension. Sometimes the saxophonist, like Sonny Rollins, breaks the structure entirely and forces everyone to adapt in real time. That's leadership, not domination, coordination. Great jazz musicians listen more than they play. I want to repeat that. And it's very important if you're in a leadership role. Great jazz musicians listen more than they play. One of the greatest misconceptions about leadership is that powerful leaders talk the most. Jazz musicians understand the opposite. The best players listen obsessively. Miles Davis understood space. John Coltrane understood emotional intensity. Herbie Hancock understood responsiveness. And Sonny Rollins understood courage and improvisation. Not all of them mastered listening before asserting this. But all of them mastered listening before asserting themselves. Modern leadership often mistakes visibility for value. Jazz musicians know if you cannot hear the room, you cannot lead the room. And that applies everywhere. Business, politics, relationships, media, and entrepreneurship. A leader disconnected from rhythm becomes noise. I'm going to repeat that. A leader disconnected from rhythm becomes noise. Improvisation is a leadership skill. A jazz musician walks on stage without complete certainty. I want you to think about that. No guaranteed outcome, no exact script, no perfect roadmap. Just preparation meeting uncertainty. That sounds a lot like entrepreneurship. It sounds like surviving hardship. It sounds like raising a family. It sounds like building something meaningful while the world keeps changing around you. Jazz musicians understand that mastery is not memorization. Mastery is adaptation. And the leaders who thrive in difficult moments are rarely the most rigid people in the room. They're the people who can absorb pressure, interpret change, maintain composure, and still create something beautiful in chaos. That's jazz. And frankly, that's life. The funny thing is that ego destroys the ensemble. Another thing jazz musicians understand, ego ruins the music. You can always hear when somebody is trying too hard to dominate the performance. The chemistry collapses, the rhythm tightens, the conversation disappears. The same thing happens in organizations. Leaders who need constant validation eventually suffocate innovation. People stop taking risk around insecure leadership. People stop telling the truth. People stop contributing authentically. Jazz punishes ego immediately because the music itself exposes it. That's why many great jazz musicians develop humility. Not weakness, humility. There's a difference. Humility says, I'm good enough to contribute, but wise enough to collaborate. That mindset builds legendary teams. You see, leadership requires emotional intelligence. Jazz is emotional communication, not just technical performance. And leadership works exactly the same way. You can have credentials, titles, and expertise, but if you cannot emotionally connect with people, eventually your leadership becomes transactional. Jazz musicians understand emotional timing. When to push, when to pause, when to support, when to challenge, when silence says more than sound. That's leadership maturity. Not every moment requires force. Sometimes leadership is restraint. Sometimes it's allowing someone else to shine. Sometimes it's protecting the rhythm instead of chasing attention. You see, although the solo matters, so does the band. Modern culture glorifies individualism. Jazz honors individuality within collective responsibility. That distinction matters. Every jazz musician has a voice. But the goal isn't self-worship. The goal is harmony without conformity. That may be one of the deepest lessons of all. Strong leadership doesn't erase individuality. They create environments where people can contribute authentically without destroying the mission. That's difficult. And jazz musicians practice it constantly. So I'm going to close with this. One reason jazz remains timeless is because it mirrors the human experience. Improvisation, conflict, recovery, tension, and release, as well as collaboration, identity, and resilience. Jazz musicians understand leadership because they understand vulnerability. Every performance is a risk. Every solo is exposure. Every moment demands trust. And maybe that's what our culture desperately needs right now. Less performance, more listening. Less ego, more collaboration. Less manufactured certainty, more courage under pressure. The world keeps rewarding loudness. Jazz rewards listening. The world rewards performance. Jazz rewards authenticity. The world rewards control. Jazz rewards trust. Maybe that's why jazz survives every generation and is currently experiencing a resurgence, especially in vinyl. Because beneath the music, jazz teaches us how to become human again. Because leadership is not about controlling every note. It's about knowing how to move with the music when life changes key unexpectedly. There you have it, folks. And I hope this helps you along your leadership journey. This is Folks on the Feather. And I'm that brother of light, dropping wisdom in your left ear and knowledge in your right. Because wisdom teaches you why, and knowledge shows you how to change your perspective while also changing your life.